Okay, so let's talk about the SAS data and the SAS PROC steps, like we have seen in week 1 and week 2 of our course. SAS programs, as we've seen, are the sequence of one or more steps, and SAS recognizes 2 steps. There's the data step and there's the PROC step. The data step typically creates a SAS dataset, and the PROC step then uses the data to generate reports, graphs, analyzes, and manages it. So here's an example of SAS program. At the top is the new data set that's being created in the data step, and then there are 2 PROC steps where we're telling SAS to print the output of the data set and then produce a frequency of a particular variable. So which one do we use, the data or the PROC? So as I said, the data step is used if you want to, say, create a new data set using the existing data set, or you want to add or delete variables from a data, or modify an existing variable or add a label, or if you want to delete observations from a data set, for example, or whatever else you need to do to modify the data set itself. So the data goes in, the data step is processed, and we get a brand new SAS dataset in the end. And this is the syntax that SAS recognizes is the creation of the new dataset. So it starts with the data, and then we say what is the output or the new dataset name. The set statement is where we put the input dataset name, so that's the already existing SAS dataset, and then we press run. And this, as I said, uses the input dataset, processes the data step, and then outputs the dataset itself. So here's an example code in which case we are creating a brand new dataset called HDAT, and we're using a dataset from the SAS help library called HDAT as well. So that's our input and that's our output dataset. If we're particularly interested in subsetting a data set, so only keeping observations where a particular expression is satisfied, we can use either a where or an if statement to select our observations. So in this instance, a where and a where expression is shown there. So we're saying we only want to keep information where sex is equal to male. Or we could have also said if sex is equal to male, then that output gets saved to our new HDAT dataset. Now you'll notice there are some slight differences in which the if and where statements are operating. So in the first instance, the where statement only reads a smaller subset of the observations, whereas the if statement actually reads the full data set and then outputs the condition where sex is equal to male. So this is, as I mentioned in class, where statement is more efficient and where it actually makes more sense to use it if you have particularly large data sets, if you want to subset data. So how do we add new variables? So we just need to name the new variable and determine its expression. So here is an example where we wanted to add a new character variable called a dataset, and we're calling it survey, and then a new variable called year, and its value is set to 2009. So that's a numeric variable. So what this would give is same value observation for all observations. In the other instance, for example, we are creating a new variable called male, where we're recoding male and female into 1 and 0s, or if we say converting kilograms from pounds. So these values then will be different across different observations. So that's the data step. What about the PROC step? So a PROC, as I said, produces the statistics or performs the analysis on a particular data set. So we've seen already the PROC freq, which is used for categorical variables if we are looking at the frequencies. We could use the PROC means or the PROC univariate a little bit later on in the course to produce some summary statistics of our continuous variables. and then we can use it to analyze the data sets using the logistic or GenMod or live test to conduct survival analysis, for example. And then we can use it to create summary reports. So the essence is to use the data, use the PROC step, and then the output is actually some summary of the actual data set. So the 4 common PROC statements that we have used in this week's class are the PROC contents, where we display the characteristic of the data set as a whole. So we have seen that it displays the names, the labels, observations and variables in the data set. So it's like a mini data dictionary. We have seen the PROC print, which displays the content of the actual data set. So it's like a tabular view of the data set itself. We've used the PROC freq to display the frequencies and the percentages for variable or multiple variables. And then we use the PROC sort to sort the data set by 1 or 2 variables of interest. So let's have a look at each of these in turn. So the PROC contents, as I said, displays the SAS data set. And it has the code PROC contents data, and then you stipulate which data set you want the contents of, and this is the example output. So in this instance you have 5,209 observations. These are all the variables in the data set, their characteristics and their labels. PROC print, on the other hand, with the command PROC print and then designating which data set we're using. Here I'm just saying I want the first 10 observations from a data set. Gives me an output, a tabular output of the actual data set itself. Now, if we specify variable statements, then we can only display variables that I'm particularly interested in. So here I'm saying to SAS, please let me just see the sex, age at start, and the smoking status, as those 3 variables are the only things that I'm interested in. I could also use a where statement in my PROC print command to subset the data set even further. So here I'm only interested in the observations for females. So the first 10 observations for females for these 3 particular variables of interest. And then finally, the PROC freq, as I've said, is used to create summary statistics in terms of the numbers and frequencies for a particular variable or multiple variables. So we use the table statement to tell SAS which variables we want the frequencies of. So in this instance, we are looking at the weight status and the sex, and our data set is the heart data set we are using in our PROC. So that's one simple way that a frequency works. And the other is a 2-way frequency table that basically produces a 2x2 table like shown in the output here. So we have a row, in this instance is a weight status variable, and a column which is sex, and then displays, for example, how many females have a normal weight status versus how many males, and then what proportion of females there were in the data set, 61%, what proportion had normal weight status, 32%, and so on. So there you go, that's our basic data and PROC steps as we're using them in week 2 for our course.